3. Hello and welcome to the Dragon Shed for this month's 3-minute skill. This is how to write essays. Now, essays are essentially a formal conversation. They are a way that your teachers, your tutors use to kind of prove and to show that you've understood what you've been taught, essentially. Most of the time essay answers are required for kind of English, literature, that kind of thing. But essays are also used in pretty much every other subject when you get beyond GCSE. Things like maths and geography tends to be fairly kind of logical and scientific kind of stuff. It then turns into more analytical and more in-depth exploration when you get into kind of A levels and beyond. Now, if you're not in the UK, these qualifications aren't going to mean very much to you. But the general, the idea of essay skills are essential for pretty much everything. You need some way to describe and compare sources, whatever those sources may be. It may be in something like media, where you're looking at films or adverts to see which are more useful, which are more impressive, to analyse storylines or to analyse experiments. If you can't write an essay answer about how an experiment went, then you kind of missed half of the point of doing science. So English is a main skill in everything we do, and essay writing is the kind of the next stage on from just being able to describe what you've seen. Now, your essay language should be as clear and as accurate as you can. You'll notice that when you start writing essays in secondary school, so that's from 11 to 16 in secondary school, your essays will be long. You'll be doing 1,500, 2,000 words for an essay. And then as you get further into A level and then degree, as you go up through university, you'll find they get a lot shorter. A lot of my university essays were only about 800 words, but requiring the same level of content. So that just shows how your language and your ability to explain the points you're making needs to become more precise and concise, so you can actually say what you need to say in fewer words, but be as clear as you were with lots of words. So that kind of is the difference between what they call competence and mastery of the whole process. So if you're a competent essay writer, you can write an essay about a Shakespeare play, anyone you like. You can write an essay about a main theme in a Shakespeare play, and you can do it in 2,000 words. And that's basic competence. Albeit it might take you a couple of weeks to do if you're not that competent with it, but it still shows your basic level. If you can write the same answer, the same quality of answer in 800 words, that indicates mastery. So different things you need to be looking at as you go through the process of schooling at different levels. So there are what I consider to be 6 main points when it comes to writing essays, and this covers a set essay, which is like a homework that you do outside of school or outside of class, or essays that you have to do in an exam. Obviously, exam essays, you don't have time to get into in-depth research, but I would hope that you had some base level of skill. Most of the time, if you're doing an exam essay, you've already seen your sources. So whether it's poetry or a novel, you've already seen it, you've already been working with it in school, in class. So you're not looking at it blind. Although some qualifications require you to read something and then write your essay about it. But you'd have some sort of level of understanding about the world that it's come from. Otherwise it's just not fair. So I've got kind of 6 major points which are the process for any kind of essay, whether it's an exam essay or a prepared one. So point number 1 is preparation, and that basically comes down to do the reading. Your teacher, tutor will either help you go through the book, you'll do it in class, in stages, or if you're in a university, then it's up to you to do the reading yourself. So you read your source, read the play, the book, whatever, and depending on what level you're at, you may need to do further reading with other sources or critical texts, and that's more for A-level and degree, where you need to kind of look at other people's views on this text, and you need to be able to read your text in comparison to Freudian theory or feminist theory or whichever. So do your reading. That is part number 1. If you are very, very, very skilled, you can perhaps get away with just reading Cliff Notes or Cambridge Notes on a text, and maybe you can put together an essay which is average. You can probably get a C, a low C for that kind of work, but that is just sheer laziness. So don't bother. Do the reading. It's the first and most important thing. Whilst you're reading, by all means, read other things. Read Cliff Notes, read any kind of reading notes that come with the text and that you can get on the side. There's plenty of those available online or wherever, and that will help you to find the main themes of your work, that what you're reading. So things like Macbeth, main themes are ambition, gender roles, magic and nature. So that's where you're going to hit. So you can pick those up as you read the play or the novel or whatever. So think about that. Once you've got the themes in your head, think about those as you're reading and make notes. Make lots of notes. I have a tendency to use post-its and to have books that are double the thickness because of the amount of post-its I put in them, but that's fine. Make as many notes as you like. You can then clarify those later on as you go through the process. For an exam prep, if you know what the questions are going to be, and they are pretty much the same sort of thing every year, so you can do exam prep for similar questions, and at least gives you some idea of where you're going. And do further reading if at all possible. In degree level, you need to be going beyond what the tutors are giving you. So they'll give you 1 or 2 other sources or a little bit of criticism, but it's up to you to then go that much further and find something else. And that's kind of part of the whole work of doing a degree, is to then extend your knowledge and your understanding beyond. In terms of an exam, you don't have time to do all of this. If you're looking at something completely new, read it a couple of times, make notes. You're allowed to make notes on your question paper, and just, in pencil if you must, but make notes, so that if for whatever reason you don't finish your work, you can, or your assessor, whoever's marking your work, can see where you are thinking, or what you're thinking, and they can kind of infer your final answers from an incomplete note. So do your prep, do the reading, just do the reading, read the book, read the play, read reviews, read other people's opinions on it, and make your own opinions. That's kind of the whole point of this, is not just reporting on this person said this. This is more about your understanding as well. So point number 2 is planning. Whether it's an exam or a prepared essay, you're going to be given a question. So look at your question. Either is it asking you to compare or to explore or discuss or explain? These words will give you your key to where you need to be going. And if you've got time, if it's a prepared essay, what other sources do you need? Does the question reference a particular critique, a particular person? So if it does, then you might want to be reading some of their stuff, other than just the things that you've been given, to try and expand your knowledge and to help give your essay more depth. And do more research. In terms of Shakespeare, there is so much out there. Just having a good understanding of how the performance system kind of worked in the Elizabethan era is a great basis for any writing on Shakespeare, because there are depths of things like racism if you're doing Othello or Tempest, plenty of religious stuff, plenty of political stuff. So if you look into the background of the world in which your author was writing, whether it's a modern day writer or pre-20th century, whichever, do some research. Again, if you're in an essay you can't do that, but you should have some level of understanding of where the writer is coming from, whichever way you do it. So, once you've done your essential bit of planning after you get your question, then re-look at your main text. I would expect someone who's writing a A-level or degree level essay to be rereading their book at least 3 times. So your first time is just your opinion on the book, what you found, what you've seen. Your second read through is looking at the question you've got and how does this book relate to my question. And that's where you can go through your notes and cross out or get rid of the ones that don't relate to your question. So in my case I start removing post-its, so I've just got the notes that are relating to my question. Then you need to think about your word count. Now most of the time in a set essay you're told what your word count is, so a couple of thousand words, maybe less depending on what level you're on, and take that into account when you're kind of building your plan for your essay. Your introduction and conclusion, I would just kind of put aside maybe 200, 300 words, and just kind of take that off as that's going to be the conclusion and introduction. I wouldn't touch those until I'd finished doing the main kind of text. And then if you list out the number of points that you want to make in relation to your question. So with the question of gender in Macbeth, you've got, obviously Lady Macbeth is the most unfeminine woman, so you're going to have 4 or 5 points that you can get from Lady Macbeth, and then obviously you can have 2 or 3 points on the witches, and them being so female and so connected to the world and nature that then reflects into Macbeth, who is unnatural and unmanned at the beginning, at least by fear. So you've got yourself 8 or 10 points there. So then if you look at your word count, if you're going for a 2,000 word essay, you've taken off 3,000 for or 300 for your intro and conclusion. That leaves you with about 1,700, and I've got 8 points, so that's around about 200 words per point, and that's a nice way of kind of balancing. These things you can finesse as you go along. Some points will need more or less depending on how in depth you're going to go, but that gives you that kind of level of flexibility. So this kind of planning in an essay or in an exam, you shouldn't take more than about 10, maybe 15 minutes to do this kind of thing, but it is important. Again, if you don't manage to finish your essay by the time your time is up, having a decent level of planning in place could let your moderator, your teacher, whoever's marking it, give you extra marks because they can see where you're going. Even if you don't get there, they can see what your plan is, and that goes towards your final mark. So never forget that. So part 3 is the writing. So this should be a fairly simple thing. It should flow. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to fight with yourself, because this kind of writing it's conversation. You take a point and you give an opinion or a fact from that point, that idea. Find a quote from your sources or your main text that is your evidence, and then discuss it. And again, if you're in degree and further, you need to discuss it with reference to a source. So that should get you 150 to 200 words just doing that. Just, this is my point I want to make. This is a quote that backs up my point. This is my explanation. So that 3-stage process. And if at all possible, add your own opinions. You've got to think about your poor teacher who's got to sit there and mark 30 plus essays all saying the same thing. And it's not fabulous, it is the most tedious thing in the world. If you can include something interesting, something that is an idea that is personal to you as much as possible, as original as possible, they will love you for something different. And if you can give that something different a decent explanation, again using a quote, using a logical reasoning, then they will up your mark for being a master, for proving that you are thinking beyond what is just written down. So that gets you mastery points, which raises your grade again. So once you've got your main bulk of your essay written, in terms of an exam, that should take up 3/4 of your time. So if you've got a 2-hour exam, then at least an hour and a half should be on your main points. Now you can always kind of put a little star at the beginning and come back for the introduction. That's fine, understood. That works. As long as you're neat in your written answers, that's fine. So part 4 is kind of the first phase of editing. With maybe 20 minutes to go on your clock, or with maybe 2 or 3 days to go before your deadline, you need to reread all your points and ask yourself, have I answered the question? Am I on subject? Have I stayed in the room? Have I not disappeared somewhere? And that is kind of the main thing that loses you points. I'm guilty of this quite a lot, but if you've found yourself kind of wavering off and going off on a tangent and losing your way, that can lose you marks because you've not stayed on the path. So your kind of first kind of phase of editing is, have I answered the question? Have I stayed here? If you haven't and you need to delete large chunks, then by all means delete large chunks. If you're doing that in an exam, put a box around it and a cross through so that it's still readable. Any things you want to delete from an exam, make sure it's still readable by your moderator. Clearly mark it as, I don't want this part, but make sure it's still readable, because if they read it and think, no, you were going right there, again, they can use that towards your mark. Everything on the paper is for them to read and goes towards your mark. Even if it's wrong, if it's written well, it goes towards your mark. So once you've made sure that you're on track and you've actually stayed with the question, now you can go on to your introduction and your conclusion. Seems a bit ridiculous to do that at the end, but it does make more sense. So with your introduction you can say, in this essay I will be discussing the gender roles within Macbeth, with particular reference to whatever. So if you can do that in 100 words or less, great for an intro. And then the rest of what you've got left is your conclusion. So you can say, yes, the gender roles were clearly separated, and the fact that Lady Macbeth was able to, or attempted to change her position, caused her end, essentially, because if she became masculine, she gave up her femininity, so therefore she had to die. Sounds a bit extreme, but that is kind of the answer you want to go for. It's something you've reasoned all the way through your essay, is that because Lady Macbeth was so unfeminine, her end was going to come. So, right. So that is kind of the general idea of the essay. So, kind of part 5 is a moment of pause. Normally within about 10 minutes of the end of the exam, or a day or so before deadline, you need to step away from the essay itself. So in an exam, it's just a couple of minutes just to reread your source or read something that's not your essay, so to kind of clear your mind slightly. In terms of a planned essay, you need to go back to your main text and just reread that, or at least reread the important parts of that, so you know that you've got the right kind of headspace going on. And any changes that you need to make will be quite glaringly obvious at that point. And then kind of the last part 6, is actual editing. The kind of final bit is read it through in your mind, read it through out loud. Obviously you can't do that in an exam, but read it through, check for clarity, for flow, grammar, punctuation. Those sort of things are related to your final score, so they're all important. So make sure it works, make sure it flows, it makes sense, it's logical. And if you're doing, again, A-level or degree, things like referencing kind of comes in towards the end, to make sure that you've got all your references correct and everything that you've quoted is properly footnoted, or if you're using Harvard or whatever kind of referencing scheme you're using, that comes at the end. Although I tend to do that as I go along because it makes more sense to me, but however you do it, make sure at the end you make sure that it's all done and your bibliography and everything else is together and neat and finished. So, for a set essay, I try and leave one day before deadline. I try, it doesn't always work. And for the first half of that day, I don't do any work. I go off and do something else. I cook, or I go for a walk. I do something that is not to do with the essay. Again, you're kind of resetting your head so that you can have one last read through and just make sure everything works. Then if you're happy with it, hand it in fairly early, so that if there are any issues with your submission, that can be sorted out before the end of the day. I know there are people out there, and I was one of them, who don't start on the essay until the week before. Bad idea. If you've got 2 months to do an essay, start as soon as you get it. Start doing your reading and your notes and everything like that. You don't have to actually put the essay together until maybe a week before, but get your notes and everything else sorted as early as possible, so that way you can walk away and refresh yourself every now and again, just so that you come back to it with a clearer eye, so you don't get drowned and bored of what you're writing about. And my final point is, do not use essay writing services. There are places that advertise online, we will write your essay for you, we will get you a pass of this level. You've got to think, how many other people are getting that option, are getting that offer? How many other people are going to enter the same answer? It's not safe, it doesn't prove anything. If you're doing that, if you're cheating your essays all the way through your course, and then it comes to a final exam, you've learnt nothing in that period. So you come to the final exam with no clue how to write an essay. So do not cheat. I say this in full knowledge that one of my cousins actually writes for one of these companies. And it's his paid job, he gets paid, he's happy to do it, but I consider it absolute cheating. It really is. The whole point of an essay is to bring your thought processes together in the appropriate way for your course. If you're going to just go out and buy your essay, why do you even go to school in the first place? You don't deserve to be in school if you're going to go and buy an essay. So that is my 6 points to building and writing essays for pretty much every subject. So yeah, I'll see you next week.